Let's open with a silent prayer, please. Amen. Thank you, Lynn, for that presentation. And before I get into this, I promise I haven't had any contact with Lynn over the past week. So there's certainly going to be some overlap in areas. But I'll be looking from a perspective of Ellen White's dream. So the title of this presentation is The Narrow, Difficult, Challenging Way. And it's from one of Ellen White's dreams that she had in 1868. So what we'll do, just before, we've had Rue and Wordy Bully look at this on and off for the past couple of months. So I thought I'd just do an overview, and the goal for this is just to keep it simple, because when Jesus spoke parables, he spoke them in a way that was simple and that everyone could understand. So that's the goal of this, to keep it as simple as possible. So what I'll do, I'll share screen, and we're just going to read her dream. She wrote it in 1869, but it was from 1868. So I'll start reading. It's from Review and Herald, January 12, 1869, paragraph 1 to further. It's a little bit of reading, but I thought we'd just do this just to get an idea of what the dream is, and then we'll get into it. Okay. While at Bennett Creek about 5 months since, I dreamed of being with a large body of people. A portion of this assembly started out prepared to journey. We had heavily loaded wagons, and as we journeyed, the road seemed to ascend. On one side of this road was a deep precipice, and on the other side was a high, white, smooth wall like the hard finish upon plastered rooms. As we journeyed on, the road grew narrower and steeper. Some places in the road seemed very narrow, so much so that we concluded we could travel no longer with the loaded wagons. We then loosed them from the horses and took a portion of the luggage from the wagons and placed it upon the horses and journeyed on horseback. As we progressed, the path still continued to grow narrow. We were obliged to press close to the wall in order to save ourselves from falling off the narrow road down the deep precipice. In doing this, the luggage and the horses pressed against the wall and caused us to sway toward the precipice. We feared that we should fall and be dashed in pieces on the rocks. We then cut the luggage from the horses, which fell over the precipice. We continued on horseback, greatly fearing as we came to the narrower places in the road that we should lose our balance and fall. At such times, a hand seemed to take the bridle and guide us over the perilous way. As the path grew more narrow, we decided that we could no longer go on horseback with safety, and we left the horses and went on foot in single file, one following in the footsteps of another. At this point, small cords were let down from the top of the pure white wall, which we eagerly grasped, to aid us in keeping our balance upon the path. As we travelled, the cord moved along with us. The path finally became so narrow that we concluded that we could travel more safely without our shoes. So we slipped them from our feet and went on some distance without them. They obviously had their socks on. Soon it was decided that we could travel more safely without our stockings or socks. These were removed and we journeyed on with bare feet. We then thought of those who had not accustomed themselves to privations and hardships. Where were such now? They were not in the company. At every change, some were left behind. And those only remained who had accustomed themselves to endure hardships. The privations of the way only made these more eager to press on to the end. Our danger of falling from the pathway increased. We then pressed close to the white wall, yet could not place our feet fully upon the path, for it was too narrow. We then suspended nearly our whole weight upon the cords and would exclaim, "We have hold from above, we have hold from above." The same words were uttered by all the company in the narrow path. As we heard the sounds of revelry and mirth that seemed to come from the abyss below, we shuddered. We heard the profane oath, the vulgar jest, and low vile songs. We heard the war songs and the dance songs. We heard instrumental music and a loud laugh mingled with cursing and cries of anguish and bitter wailing. And were more anxious than ever to keep upon the narrow, difficult pathway. Much of the time we were compelled to spend our whole weight upon the cords and then increased in size as we progressed. I noticed that the beautiful white wall was stained with blood. It caused a feeling of regret to see the wall thus stained. This feeling, however, lasted but for a moment, as I soon thought that it was all as it should be. Those who are following after will know that others have passed the narrow, difficult way before them, and will conclude that if others were able to pursue their onward course, they can do the same. And as the blood should be pressed from their aching feet, they would not faint with discouragement, but seeing the blood upon the wall, they would know that others had endured the same pain. At length, we came to a large chasm at which our path ended. There was nothing now to guide the feet, nothing upon which to rest them. Our whole reliance must be upon the cords, which had increased in size until they were as large as our bodies. Here we were for a time thrown into perplexity and distress. We inquired in fearful whispers, to what is the cord attached? My husband was just before me. The large drops of sweat were falling from his brow. The veins in his neck and temples were increased to double their usual size, and suppressed, agonizing groans came from his lips. The sweat was dropping from my face, and I felt such anguish as I had never felt before. A fearful struggle was before us. If we failed here, all the difficulties of our journey had been experienced for naught. Before us, on the other side of the chasm, was a beautiful field of green grass about 6 inches high. I could not see the sun, but bright soft beams of light resembling fine gold and silver were resting on this field. Nothing I had seen upon earth could compare in beauty and glory with this field. But could we succeed in reaching it? Was the anxious inquiry. Should the cord break, we must perish. Again, in whispered anguish, the words were breathed. What holds this cord? For a moment, we hesitated to venture. Then we exclaimed, our only hope is to trust wholly to the cord. It has been our dependence all the way, all the difficult way. It will not fail us now. Still, we were hesitating and distressed. The words were then spoken. God holds the cord. We need not fear. These words were then repeated by those behind us, accompanied with, He will not fail us now. He has brought us thus far safely. My husband then swung himself over the fearful abyss into the beautiful field beyond. I immediately followed, and oh, what a sense of relief and gratitude to God we felt. I heard voices raised in triumphant praise. To God, I was happy, perfectly happy. I awoke and found that from the anxiety I experienced in passing over the difficult route, every nerve on my being seemed to be in tremor. This dream needs no comment. It made such an impression upon my mind that probably every item in it will be vivid before me while my memory shall continue. So thank you for bearing with that. It's a fair bit of reading. So before we get into what this is about, this is a dream she had in 1868. And why is 1868 important to us? Because, like every parable, we want to make it relevant to us now. What happened in 1868? Externally, you had a populist president who disagreed with equality at that time, and he was impeached for sacking or firing someone he wasn't supposed to fire. So, and that was Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson. I keep getting Andrew Jackson and Johnson mixed up, but I think it's Johnson. And this was, so externally, there was an external event where you got an impeachment. Internally, Ellen White had this dream. And so 151 years later, externally, we had a populist president who didn't agree with equality. He fired someone he wasn't supposed to fire, and he was impeached. So what are we supposed to do with this dream? What are we supposed to do with it? We have to put it on the line and work out, why is this important to us? What is this dream trying to tell us? And what does it mean for us now? Because it's important enough that God's left a little trail of breadcrumbs to help us understand, for some reason in 2019, this is important for us and very relevant. And that's what I've done here. Haven't put any dates to it yet. So we'll put this dream on a line. Okay. So what's this story about? This story is, it starts off with a large group of people, and a small group comes out of that large group. And what's the parable we all know that sounds like that?
Stone come out of the mountain.
A stone come out of the mountain. So, okay. So what the goal of this is to keep this simple. And so here we've got a group of people starting out on this journey. The journey is pretty long. It's narrow, and it increasingly gets steeper and steeper and narrower, or more and more difficult as they progress along this path. They start off with a lot of things. They start off with lots of different things, and to stay on this path, they actually have to drop things off, because if they don't actually discard some of these things as they move along here, they'll either can't continue because the narrow path won't let them, or they'll just fall off. If they try and force their belongings along the path, it'll hit the wall, it'll bounce off, and they'll go with it. So pretty well, to stay on this path, there's a whole bunch of things you've got to actually let go, discard. It gets to it increasingly gets more and more difficult. Cords get let down at this way mark, and I might just start and just say, when they start journeying out, that's the beginning of the story, and we know that is 1989. So they begin the journey, cords get let down. Obviously, it gets to continue on the path, they need assistance. Cords get let down over the wall, and those cords travel with them, and those cords help them to get from destination to destination. So as they go along this path, the cords help them keep them on that path, so they don't fly off. Cords increase in size. It gets to, when they get to this point, I'm just going to keep it simple, and just as we progress, I'm just going to put the dates up for now. I was going to do the dates later on, but I'll do it now. So when they get to this point, we're not going to focus very much on it, but they hear a lot of noise. So at this point in their journey, they're at such an altitude or such a height. Well, what they're hearing is all sorts of different music, all different sorts of noises. And that noise is coming from down here. And that noise is from society. It's war songs, it's peace songs, it's people who are being abused, it's people who are laughing and in a carnival. It's like a broad spectrum of society. And so at this point here, this group is at such an altitude, they're starting to see what God sees. They're starting to see through God's eyes, and what God sees is everything. So nationalism starts being discarded, or supposed to be, as far as, because back here they're in their own little world, they're in there, but here they're becoming aware of everything around them. They're seeing through God's eyes because they're so high up. They don't like what they see. They don't like what they hear. They're hearing, and I guess at this point, I'm hoping people can start understanding and appreciate what God has to see as well, as He has to witness, the oppression, the abuse, all these people. It's just a broad spectrum of society that we can start seeing. But we're not going to focus on that. I just thought I'd mention that as we go. We continue through here. Chords expand. Chords expand right on time, as you'd expect. So also I want to notice, as they start here, they're letting go of comforts as such. It's not so challenging. But when you remove your socks and you go on bare feet, that starts being it's a bit more painful. But by the time you get here, you're scraping your feet and you're bleeding. So this is not an easy path. This is not an easy journey. And it's so challenging that by the time the group gets to here, even the leaders, Ellen White and James White, they are struggling so much. They're questioning the chords. They're going, is this even possible? Are we seriously being asked to do this? It must be so unusual a request that's outside of what they would expect God to say, maybe. It's so hard for them that they've really got to make the commitment to jump on that chord and swing over this chasm. They have to really, really believe it. Back here, you can probably get away with it, but by the time you get to here, you don't believe that who holds the chord here. You're not actually going to swing across that chasm, because if that chord is wrong or it fails or it breaks, you die in the chasm. So at this point, you're forced to make a choice, and it's a choice. Do you actually believe God actually holds that chord? And then obviously there's lots of symbols and everything that indicate that they're going through the time of trouble, because there's great sweat drops.
All earthly support.
All earthly support is cut off. That's right. So we're not going to break everything down. We're not going to look at all the symbols or anything. We just want to look at this as a simple story. So as you've worked out, you know this is the story of the priests. So what is this about? This is a story about this movement and how it has progressed and what God's kingdom looks like. It's also a story about me and you and our experience. And it's been a challenging experience. And this is a story about us on our journey. I might clarify two things before I go on. So and just this might be some people who might not understand this, I'll just mention this. So this is a line of the priests or the movement, God's kingdom. But you'll say, well, I joined the movement here. And so when you join the movement and you start learning some of these things, symbolically, you're here, even though you might be in 2016. As you learn the things that you're supposed to learn, that God leads you through your individual process, symbolically, you can still be placed at these points as you learn and you go on this path. So even though it's 2016, you might have just learned about this here. And so you symbolically, you were at these points, even though you're literally at 2016 or 2018 when you joined. And that's why Elder Tess, a long time ago, she would say things like, put yourself on the line, because when you put yourself on the line, you know what you're supposed to do, what you're supposed to believe, and how you're supposed to think. And so we're supposed to model our personal experience against this line to keep up and to make sure we're doing as God tells us to do as He holds the cords and leads us along this path. So this is a story about group, or us, you and me, and the movement. Is the movement, God's movement, and us as people, are we prepared to discard things? Sorry, my squeaky chair. As we progress along this line. And so what actually began this process was Elder Jeff, and he uncovered line upon line, which is parable methodology. And parable methodology, particularly as we've learned up in this history, it's just a tool. It's a tool when you use and you apply to history or the Bible or inspiration, it gives us information. And that information is this process here. And so at the beginning, at the increase of knowledge, we were given, as we all know, I expect us all to pretty well know this now, we were given line upon line. And it's like, well, what's so uncomfortable about that? Well, it's not uncomfortable. When this information comes to us, it's generally the formalisation where it starts affecting your life and starts becoming problematic for people. Because that's when it requires a change, and most of the time it goes against what you previously thought, which is what Lynn was talking about this morning. And so, well, okay, line upon line. So by the time we get to the formalisation of 1996, what was the implication? What was the thing? What was the problem? So obviously it was Daniel 11, 40 to 45. So what was that about? It's basically saying, okay, so now we're heading into a final generation, Sunday law is imminent, and the conference isn't listening, they're not interested, they don't want to know about it. So all of a sudden, hang on, if this theory is actually true, God is no longer working within the conference. And so you've got a decision to make. Do I actually stay with this little group here, or do I go back to the church? So I guess you've got a choice here. Am I going to hang around the church? That was one of the main implications. The methodology was different to what the the mountain was using. So you had to sort of make a choice, and that was becoming uncomfortable for people because some people have been in that place for 50 years, as an example. But anyway, this brought us to 2001, where that theory was verified, even though it wasn't verified till a number of years later, that this actually was the case, it was actually true. So it was confirmed. No longer a theory, we are, in fact, this was verified. The repeat of history was verified. We are actually repeating our history. I'm not going to go into detail. Next thing we came across, even though lots of people in the church might shudder seeing that number, it doesn't really do much. It doesn't affect people's lives in any meaningful way. But by the time we got to the formalisation, this was so difficult that it was shut down. And more than that, this test of time setting, because that was the implication, 151126, this is so problematic that people were dealing with it in this history, even though it was this history. So very uncomfortable. Now with bare feet. All right, I'll get the way. So again, this increase of knowledge, the formalisation we are now time setting brings us to the test of 2014. Just like here, test. So this, you've got to give some things. So back here, are you going against Bible texts?
A little bit.
A little bit?
Yeah.
You've got to stay with the ship. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. Here, are you going against inspiration?
Very much so.
It's uncomfortable. So again, the only thing that keeps you safe is if you hold on to the message, and that tool, when correctly applied to history and inspiration, gives you information, the correct information. The moment you let go of that tool, that helps you correctly work this out, which is what Lynn was talking about this morning as well. That's what keeps you safe. Here we are, we're not going to talk about that much, but we know that that's Sunday law. So we'll progress on. So what happened here? What were we learning? That's when the studies of Raffia and Pennett came out. And they were really interesting studies, just like this one. They were all interesting studies. This was refound. It wasn't necessarily it was uncovered. It was already in existence. So Raffia and Pennett, this is like a battle. King of the North, King of the South. Really interesting studies. Found interesting. Didn't really affect your life. Come to here, now your feet are scraping against the wall. And why are your feet scraping against the wall and bleeding?
Message of a call.
Okay. So, and that brings us to the chasm. And it's like, well, here we've this group, there's people dropping off progressively who just disagree and they're not prepared to discard things. People, the truth tells us progressively at every change, people were dropping. Oh, sorry. All right, I'm reading the chat now, everyone. Okay, is my voice still breaking up? Or is it okay? Is that better? I'll keep going. Tell me if there's a problem. Just unmute yourself and let me know.
It seems to be good, Brenden.
Okay, thank you. So there's people all along this path who are not prepared to let go of things. And they stop on the journey. They don't continue on. And so when we come to some of these things that have been uncovered that make us uncomfortable, we've got a choice to make. We come to a point of decision. Are we actually going to change and adopt this information that parable teaching has revealed, or we're going to keep our own mind, which is similar to what Lynn was saying this morning? At some point, we're here, and it's becoming so problematic that even Ellen White and James White are questioning who's actually holding this cord. Surely by now we all know who's holding the cord. And I guess the question is, how did we get from this study, King of the North, King of the South, to equality? And so that's probably what we'll focus on for a little bit now. How did we actually get to this point? Because this is hard. Look, it tells us, the dream even tells us it's actually a difficult step in our experience. This is our experience. Reflect on what we've been going through. Look back in the past. This is what we've gone through. And obviously we're standing here now. So this dream was identified at this year here. And why is that? So actually, just before I go on, here we've actually got to discard some things. We've got to discard gender biases, sexism, conspiracy theories, which what Lynn was talking about, nationalism, headship had to go, things like that. And in 2019, this dream was pinpointed to look at that time. What happened in 2019? So if we go back to 1799, Napoleon had some engineers and they were digging up a wall, some ruins in the town of Rashid, and they found a stone. So the town of Rashid we would know in the West as the town of Rosetta, and they uncovered a stone that we know as the Rosetta Stone. Now that stone had 3 sections. All right. It had Egyptian hieroglyphics. It had Egyptian demotic texts, and it also had ancient Greek. And so what ended up happening, they had some scientists, they could actually work out tracing it because it was like a message, the same message repeated 3 times or very similar. So from that, they could actually decode the language of Egypt. They could go back and work out what that hieroglyphics were actually saying. And then they could start from there working out, they could actually go to all the other ruins and work out what that writing, all those hieroglyphics were actually saying. So all the way back in 1799, this Rosetta Stone, it was a catalogue, and it was cataloging a decree between the priests of Egypt and Ptolemy V Epiphanes. And it was I guess it is simply say it was like the interactions between the church and the state. And what it was cataloguing was the priests were honouring the king. That's what they were saying. So essentially, at this point in 1799, they decoded the language of the king of the south, or Egypt, and it told us a story. And it was it gave us an indication of that relationship. And in that relationship, the priest or the king was over the priests. So Ptolemy was over the priests. They were sort of honouring the king in various ways. So what else is interesting, this Rosetta Stone was created in 198 BC. Now, I better look at my notes here. Yeah, 198 BC, which was just a year after the conclusion of the actual Battle of Panium. And the actual Battle of Panium, we know, was a battle between the King of the North and the King of the South. So the Seleucid Empire defeated the Ptolemaic Empire. And so this, which is a battle between the King of the North and the King of the South. So basically, what we're going to do here, this unlocked the language of the King of the South in 1799. And 220 years later, which we know is a restoration, a symbol of restoration, in 2019, we have a series of studies that unlock the language of the King of the South. So I'll draw another key. Badly. Another key. And what did those studies tell us? What did those studies, what was the consequence of those studies? So the King of the North, which we all seem to focus on and have focused on for many, thousands of years, really. You know that you can go to Revelation, go anywhere.
The church over state.
It's a church over state. But in 2019, a series of studies were done and unlocked the language of the King of the South. And the language of the King of the South is state over church. If you can see that. So these studies were, well, one of the main ones was at the German International Camp meeting in 2019. There was also others. I think it was, there was also other studies that told us about equality as well. It was New Earth to New Earth, or the modern version of those is Eden to Eden. So there's other studies that back up this model of, we'll get there in a second. So I just want to go back a second. When these chords were expanding in 2018, we know that's the midnight cry. What was the foundational argument or the foundational story of the midnight cry message? So we've got the counterfeit, bookended it, began with the counterfeit, ended with the counterfeit. We had Acts 27, but what was the rest of it about? Because Acts 27 took us somewhere.
Pyrrhus.
Took us to Pyrrhus, and the rest of it was about Pyrrhus, and Pyrrhus is the King of the South. So all these studies pointed us to this story about the King of the South. And it kept going and it was so detailed, and it told us about the King of the Souths and the modern versions of those as well. All right, so if we look at this and we talk to, why have we been focused on this so much? It's because the Bible tells us to. Because we could go to Daniel, we could go to
Revelation.
Paul. History of iniquity has to come first. Daniel is all about the King of the North. He's living through the King of the North. He's prophesying about the King of the North. Everything is centered around the King of the North. Who else? John just said John, the Revelator, because Revelation. A lot of that's about the King of the North. So it's no wonder we've all been focused on that. But who's focused on the King of the South? So King of the North, King of the North, King of the North. Daniel talks a little bit about the King of the South. John talks a little bit about King of the South in Revelation 11. What does Ellen White say about the King of the South? Great controversy. She talks, I think it's chapter 15, she talks about a current event, the French Revolution, or an existing event that ties in prophetically. She talks about what that looks like. And she goes, well, in that chapter, she goes, well, Egypt plus Sodom equals France. And she explains that, well, Egypt, or the atheism of Egypt, however you spell that, I'll get that wrong.
ATHEMISM.
Atheism. We'll get rid of this. Atheism and licentiousness of Sodom. The characteristic of Egypt, the characteristic of Sodom equals what the characteristics of atheistic France, or the France during the French Revolution. That's how she explains it. That's sort of all we get. And so when we talk about King of the North, the King of the South, it's a model of geography, and I'm not going to go into drawing the Earth and the two poles. But when we work that out, we know that the King of the North is what I said, it's church over state. And then when we come down to the polar opposite of that, the King of the South, it's state over church. So when we get to here, Midnight Cry message, we also learn about the King of the South even further. The USSR and Russia. And so when we consider Russia, we consider Vladimir Putin. And I guess what was revealed is the King of the North has a relationship, and that relationship looks like a church and state relationship. When you look at the King of the South, it is also a church and state relationship, but they're different. But what's different with the King of the South has, when you look at the relationship of the King of the South, it can be seen as and Elder Tess wrote this in 2019, and I think it's a really good example of how to explain it. It's like a sliding scale. And so when you see the King of the South and how it interacts with its church, it can look like atheism, like France, where France gets a sword and kills the church. So this relationship can get that violent that the church is killed. But it can also go all the way up to here, and it can look really attractive. And to some people anyway. So Putin's Russia, to a lot of people, looks attractive. And so Russia is, I would say, up here. And when you look at this model, it's the King of the South, the relationship it has with its church can go from control, because that's the relationship with the state over the church, and it can go progressively on the scale. Then it can go to a silencing, then it can go to abuse, until finally it's so bad that it gets killed, it's death. Now that's a big spectrum of a relationship between a church and a state. And why this is so interesting is because when you look at Russia or Putin has been a spokesperson. He's been one of the biggest advocates for the church. So it's so far removed from killing it, he actually wants it in existence, and he's almost like a hero of the far right evangelical Protestant movement. That's why they didn't have a problem when Trump and Putin were doing their thing together. They actually were more than happy for them to come together. So how does that work? You've got Vladimir Putin up here. So let's just draw that. So you've got Putin's Russia, you've got the state over the church. That's the relationship. All right. So that's a model. What would happen if the church started going, I don't sort of agree with what you're doing there, Vladimir. We sort of want to, we've got some different ideas and we don't agree with you. We want a bit more say. What would that King of the South start doing? It would start sliding down this scale. And we know that because that's what the USSR did. We know that Lenin, how can I forget that? Stalin. We know that Stalin was killing the church, but then World War II happened and he needed to address Hitler and he needed support from the church. So he actually went from here and he changed and he started being more open and not as aggressive towards the church. So depending on the time in history, depending on the circumstances, the king, the state, will treat the church differently, depending on where they're at. So, that's interesting. But this model, this is what it's all about, because that's fine when you apply it to Vladimir Putin and Putin's Russia and Stalin. But we know that it's a man over a woman. And we know the King of the North, which we despise so much, is a woman over a man. And that's just offensive to all us good Seventh-day Adventists. But when we come to this, we actually model in the past, this is a progressive thing we've had to learn, and this is why this has been so difficult. Because in the past, we've grabbed our Bible verses and we've modelled our lives, our churches, our communities on this model. And so the implication of this, so we could go, okay, well, our churches or ministries or the movement or our communities, so there's an implication there. We've actually modelled it on that. So we'll just say movement because I'm out of room, or church. We've actually kept the same model in our history because that's what we think is the right thing to do, because we don't want to follow this because the Bible says that's bad, which it is. But all this study in this history is telling us how bad this model is. And so number two, it's our movement, our elder test would say the boards, eldership, leadership has been man over woman. Brings us to our third implication. It's what's our home life look like? It's the same model. That's what we've modelled ourselves on. And so I'm hoping you can see the implication of this here when you look down at not just state and church, but when you look at the movement or you look at the relationships within that movement and you look at your home life. Because when you look up here, this relationship, it can actually look attractive. You know, you've got in your home life, you've got you're a well-oiled machine. Yeah, you've got a strong male, masculine, who makes the decisions for the family, goes to work, keeps them on the right path. The woman stays at home, looks after the kids, keeps the home running smoothly, keeps herself well presented for a husband. This is becoming offensive to us now, but previously not so much. She doesn't really intervene in the main decisions. This can look good to a lot of people. So men, look after your wives, and women submit to your husbands. That's the model. And I guess in a summary, women's value in this area is of less importance than the man's value. But then a message comes, doesn't it? That says, sorry, not the King of the North is offensive and is bad for us, but this model is also offensive. God's kingdom looks like equality, side by side, no one controlling the other. And so this is what messages hit this movement. So I'm hoping you can see now, this model is sin. Elder Tess and Elder Parminter have no choice but to take eldership, boards, people presenting, the whole restructuring of the movement had to be brought in agreement with this equality model, away from this model. They didn't have a choice. The one who held the cord, he's the one that mandated that. And so a message has come to individuals within this movement, and some people have disagreed. And what you'll have noticed over the recent history is a lot of relationships have been strained, separations broken, because one person is prepared to bring themselves in agreement and let go of this model, because that's something we have. This is the thing that had to be discarded. And some people would hold on to that. And just for the sake of argument, the sake of a simple, the woman wanted to get from underneath this model, and the man said, no, I want this to stay. And as a result, this process starts happening. So even though this might look attractive to some people, this is sin, control and abuse. This is sin, control and abuse. This is sin, control and abuse. And even what looks good is sin, control and abuse. And whether it's Vladimir Putin's Russian state that will start this sliding scale process of abuse, or whether it's people in the movement trying to maintain their masculine boards or whatever, or your home life, if this control is maintained, or someone wants to get out from underneath and the other one wants to maintain control, that person wanting to maintain control will start silencing and abusing, and you have to separate. So this has been a period of turmoil in our personal situation because of this message of equality. And the King of the South has taught us that. And it's been liberating for lots of people. It's been freeing, but it's also been very, very difficult and challenging. And another way of looking at this, time check. Has anyone got any questions on that before I go on? I hope I explained it in a way that it's a model of abuse. And the abuse will just vary. That's all. That's why they had no choice. Elder Tess and Parminder had no choice but to have women elders. They had no choice because the movement had to be in agreement with the message that was given. Presenting formats and people presenting had to be, it had to be brought to equality. If I was to simplify this, another way of looking at this is a story of all of us changing our minds. So this is a brain. Here's a brain. And this is God's method of changing our mind from there to here. And he's had to do that progressively and only reveal certain things at certain times. So before I get to that, So that's what we learned here, but we didn't properly understand that, and we ended up with more information released here, and that was the study of the Apis bull. Yeah. So I've sort of digressed a little bit. And that, I'll just to simply put, that's that was a really interesting study, but the consequence of that was gay marriage. So I'm not going to go into detail here how the study of this and what that meant and how it got us to that point. I mean, but by the time we got to here, we realised that ancient Greece was homophobic, and so when you get to those conclusions, it starts explaining all the verses and all the history and. But we won't go into that detail. So I guess, how do we reflect on your own experience? How we think like this now, and hopefully some or all of us are now thinking at this point. Reflect on how we began, what we've gone through, and how we think now. Some of us have actually think now the complete opposite than how we began. Some of us have had such radical changes. And so another way of looking at this, I sort of missed something here. I'm skipping, I'm going to go back. No, I won't. I'm not following my notes. So I want to talk about what it means to go from that mindset to this mindset. And I'm going to use that history and this history, or the history of the first angel and the history of the second angel. Okay, so this is the history of the first angel, history of the second angel. But I'm going to put it over here. History of the first, history of the second. And I'm going to use John the Baptist as an example for the first angel. And I'm going to use Jesus as that example. So when I'm talking about John, I'm talking about a symbol. So he's a person who has that brain up there, okay? So here's John's brain, or a person that thinks that way. And all this means is John's a symbol of someone who hasn't progressed. He hasn't gone on and continued dropping things off in his experience. I know John died and in the story, but just pretend that's a person who hasn't progressed on, even after Jesus giving him parables after parables to help explain what's happening. That person didn't continue on, okay? So let's keep this simple. When we consider the Messiah, what did John expect? You know, a king, a conquering king, not just a king, someone who's going to conquer. And when Jesus came, he was a teacher. All right. And the kingdom, what did this brain think the kingdom look like? Israel is going to rise in prominence. Yeah, we agree with that. What did Jesus say? It's going to be cut off. It's going to fall. So, and when we get to, so the problem with this is when you've got a conquering king and you believe the kingdom's going to rise, what are you going to do? You're going to go, this conquering king, and Israel's going to rise to prominence because we've got a conquering king. We're going to look for an external event that matches this. And so what event are they going to expect? Because who are they in subjection at that point?
Right.
To Rome. So if Israel is going to rise, who's going to fall?
Right.
So Rome to be defeated. That is what you're looking for. Over here, you've progressed in your mind to this point here. Showed about Jesus, the teacher, who's actually saying, actually, Israel's going to fall. And what's the external event you're going to see or look for?
Destruction of Israel, Jerusalem.
Ready.
Yeah, Jerusalem. Just defeated or destroyed. So, when did this happen? Give me an event where this happened. I'll give you a date. AD 66. What happened? The Roman armies surrounded Jerusalem. The Israelite armies were on the inside, fortified in their city. Then what happened?
They withdrew.
The armies withdrew, and what did the Israelite soldiers do? They opened the gates, they took after the Roman armies and slaughtered, killed thousands of them. Don't know the exact figure, but I know they killed Roman soldiers. So let's back up a second. Okay, well, actually, pretend, put yourself back at that time now. So pretend you have this brain here. This is you. Pretend you think this way. And you have a friend and she thinks this way. All right? Place yourself back at that time. You're expecting a conquering king. You know Israel's going to rise. And you know Rome's going to be defeated. So when that army returns after defeating the Roman armies, what are you going to do? You're going to get some wine. You're going to look for your friends. You're going to go back into the city and you're going to celebrate.
No,
You look for your friend, and where is she? You can't find her anywhere. She didn't even go back inside to get her coat, and she took off and she got out of that entire area, never to return. So here we've got same event, two different, totally different responses. So at this moment, this would be the close of probation, or near about, or before the close of probation on that line. But I'm hoping you can start seeing the importance of changing your mind and following this and changing your mindset from there to here. Because if you don't continue your progressive mind changing, you're going to end up celebrating something that's on the wrong side of the issue. I'm hoping you can see the importance, because the consequence here is this person gets caught up in the destruction of Jerusalem, and this person dies. This person has escaped. And Jesus warned about this. But if you're expecting this in God's kingdom, and you're not expecting it to look anything like this, and when God actually comes and reveals that, same as up here. If you've got expectations of what you think God looks like, and he's holding these cords, leading you through this path, saying, that's not what I'm about, and that's not what my kingdom looks like. You've got to decide whether you're prepared to listen to the one who holds the cords, or you're prepared to actually hold on to your own baggage, your own conspiracy theories, your own beliefs, worldviews. They all have to go. And a question I have is, when did you put your shoes on? When did you put your socks on? When did you put your wagon? When did you pack your belongings? When did all that work start? Where did you put your shoes on?
At the beginning of your journey.
Right back up in that mountain. All the preparation,
At the beginning, before you started the journey.
all the preparation work you thought you needed to do as a Christian, you did all the way back there. And God's progressively been very patient, as well as the leaders and our teachers. They've been very patient in helping us change our minds. And the very preparation that you made in your previous 40 years in that mountain, because you're ready to go, you're in this little elite group, you started on this journey, and all these preparations you made, now you're being told to get rid of. Some people in this movement have, when they were in the world, actually are coming full circle and starting to think a little bit how they used to think before even entering that mountain. And they go, I know it's not exactly the same. You can see the danger of staying in that mindset. What's the time? There's lots we can talk about this. And as you can see, if we simply just think about this story, it's a story about whether you believe God or not. And it's like a battle in your mind about and it's exactly what Lynn was talking about. It's a battle in your mind. Are you prepared to follow the messages because you know who holds the cords? Or are you going to hold your existing worldviews and your opinions on all these topics? Whether it's gay marriage, vaccinations, or patriarchalism. Because it's so difficult because you've got lots of verses to back up what you want to back up. You can go to plenty of verses and say, look, of course women have to submit to men. That's just how God works. You can grab a verse and say that. You have to misuse and twist it. But that's what everyone's been doing for thousands of years. God doesn't change. And you can see why he can only reveal certain things at certain times, because look how hard it's been for a lot of us. And look how many people aren't with us anymore, because lots of people aren't prepared to let go of their worldviews. I could do a little, there's so many presentations saying the same thing, so many models telling us the same thing. We know this is the ploughing, former rain, latter rain, harvest. Remember, at every point, the plant is perfect. So as you progress in your experience and you accept what God is, as you're holding the cord, He's leading you down this path, remember? You're perfect at the plant, at every point in growth is perfect. So there's models that are telling us the same information. We could look at it from the judgment of the living, from vows 21 and 24. A progressive sealing. You seal that as you accept this information. Prophecy, because we look at this as prophecy. Prophecy is like it's moral issues controlled by time. So we're facing a moral issue, a moral test. And it's how do we treat gender? How do we look at that? And that is bound by time. And this is the time that we need to make sure we're on the right side of the issue. And if we don't progress in our brains, when the event comes, Sunday law, when the event comes, I hope I don't celebrate something that's on the wrong side of the issue, because I haven't continued changing my mind. Has anyone got I might just summarise, but has anyone got any comments or anything they'd like to?
You won't even recognise the Sunday law when it comes, because you're expecting something else.
Yeah, if you don't change in your mind, you're going to be celebrating the very thing you're supposed to be fleeing from. And that these two people are looking at the same event and having completely opposite responses. It's changing us from one point to a completely different point. But He hasn't changed. We're the ones, He's trying to fix the problem. He had to plough and get rid of lots of problems to begin with and progressively work on us. And I guess the point is, we're here right now. The priest line is coming to a conclusion. And this is where we've just gone through this. It's been long, even though some of us only been in it a few years. It's been full on, it's been liberating, beautiful, challenging, hard. All of us need to look back on our experience, what we've just gone through. We've had leaders and teachers who have been there guiding and helping us in this process. God has been patient. He's had empathy. Our leaders and teachers have been patient and had empathy. Changing our mind from there to here didn't happen quickly. It didn't happen overnight. And so why I'm saying this is because we're just about to go to the next group of people. And if you think you're going to go and get a sickle and just cut them and they're harvested, that's not what happened to us. Look at what we had to go through to change our minds. It didn't happen to us. It's not going to happen to them. They need to understand all the things we needed to understand. We had lots of, maybe a few people worked very hard in helping us to change our minds. And so as we go to work, we need to be working now. We need to have that same empathy and care and patience with the next group of people. It didn't, this took time. Minds just don't change like that. That's because that's not, you've got to look on your experience. Did your mind just change one day?
It wasn't a fast brain experience.
Definitely not a fast brain experience. So it's a little rebuke to us all to say we need to be doing our bit now, and we need to have empathy on everyone moving forward, because this is not an easy thing, and it's not going to be easy for the Levites. They need to understand all the messages. They need to understand about counterfeit, King of the North, King of the South, Acts 27. How long did it take you to learn that? To understand why. There's lots more I could talk about, but I think last point, and then I'll finish. Obviously, this is the line of the priests. But this line very shortly won't exist anymore. It exists in our experience in our past, but it's coming to an end. If imminently, if not already, I'm not sure. So this line no longer exists. This is now the line of the 144,000. And so in the line of the 144,000, we're actually standing here. And we've literally just taken off our socks. And so God is expecting more from us than I think we realise, because we've just gone through all of this as priests to get us to the point where we can actually communicate some things to the next group and do it with a brain that God trusts. You can't trust that brain. You had to take us through this so we can help the next group. But now we're the 144,000 very shortly, and now we're standing here. And so all that experience is just what we've just done there. So we've just got rid of the wagons, and we're not actually at the hard bit yet. So this is all about helping the next group, preparing us to do some work in this field. Now the 144,000, this is preparation. God's expecting a lot from us. I'm not sure what that's going to look like in the 144,000 line, but you know, we've just gone through an experience. We've got a taster of what this is going to look like. I'm not sure what brain we're supposed to be learning through here, or what changes we're required to, but whatever it is, we trust God because He holds the cords. And we're hanging on for dear life here, because we're going to swing over here, land in this field at the second advent, and we're going to be able to be useful to God in the way that He designed, whatever that looks like, when we may have to be talking to people like Joshua or Noah or any of these other people. I'll stop there. Has anyone got anything they'd like to add or comment on, or any questions?
I just say thank you, Brenden, and it's interesting just how there was so many similarities really between the idea of what I was talking about this morning and what you've been sharing.
We weren't colluding, were we, Lynn?
No, not at all. But it's interesting, isn't it?
But if
Well-
we don't want to fear the future, we have to remember that experience.
Yeah, I hope I haven't like fear in people, but at the end of the day, God's expecting things from us, mainly to change our minds. And he's hoping we're going to let go of the things that otherwise are not useful to him.
I'm just thinking about that quote of Ellen White's, we have nothing to
Fear, except we
forget.
can't forget this.
Yeah.
We can't forget this. This is going to be, we're going to have to draw on this, especially when we're just going to be talking to Levi shortly, whatever that looks like. We know it's going to look similar to what we've gone through because we need to explain how do we change our minds. They're going to go through a similar thing. It's going to be difficult. We're going to be involved in lots of, I don't mean arguments as in we're arguing, I mean discussions, arguments of trying to, anyway. All right, has anyone got anything else they'd like to say? All right, let's close in prayer. If we could all kneel if you're able. Dear God in heaven, we thank you for your patience towards us. We thank you that you only reveal things as we're able to take them on board. We know that you've been working for thousands of years to try and help restore your people. We're living in a very, very important time in history. Help us to see how important this time is and the importance of, I guess, changing our minds so we can be useful to you. Help us to be better equipped in moving forward, in helping people. Help us to draw on the experience we've gone through so we can be better at helping people. We thank you and we ask for a blessing upon your people all around the world. And we just thank you and give you praise. We know you hold the cords. Some of us struggle. We just pray for an increased level of faith on all of us, Lord, that we can successfully navigate this, trust in you fully, knowing that you are and you do hold the cords. We pray and we thank you for all these things. Bless us in the remainder of this Sabbath. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thanks, Brenden. That was really good.
You're welcome. So has anyone got anything they'd like to comment on or anything they'd like to say?
I just wonder if some of the things we are learning on the line, that if we're a slow learner, that God then, just through things in our own experiences, that in our own personal lives, God is, I wonder if he's allowing things to happen that will enforce what we're learning on the line, if that makes sense.
Well, everyone's being confronted with how their worldview functions right now, whether they're even prepared to be vaccinated or not. Like circumstances are bending to make us address these things. And if you're in the movement, the messages are going to confront you, because if you're, gender biased, or if you're patriarchal in any way, you're not going to like equality, and it's being enforced on you in a way by God. So if you're not going to like it, you're going to not progress in the experience. But at the same time, God is merciful, and he, you know, this is why we have to throw ourselves at the line personally. And that is when you know what you were supposed to do and how you're supposed to think. And like I said, you could just have joined in 2018. So you're a seed at 2018 and you literally just got planted, and you had to learn these same messages. You might have only taken a week to understand the third woe enough to accept 2001. So, oh, there you go. Now the plant is perfect at every step. So as we're being confronted with these things, it's important to know who holds the cord. I guess that's basically what it's about.
Amen.
I was just, I was going to say, I got told just a little while ago, this man and that man they're strong men. And when they're in a group, they want to be the ones that are talking. They'll talk and they'll talk. And if they're not talking, they leave. And I'm thinking, because I've never heard it expressed to me that way. And then my mind kind of went back to, you know, the message of equality. And I'm thinking they're going to have a hard time. Like what you're saying, you know, the brain, changing the brain, if they're going to be at all giving the message, helping give the message to the news.
Yeah, I think understanding gender equality, which is the test for us, test for our time, I think we're going to, it's going to be a consistent learning. But you can see the danger here if you've got one partner prepared to change their mind and the other partner not prepared to change their mind. And that's why we've seen, so this message has come and hit our home life, this message has come and hit the movement, this message is hitting the world. And the movement had to be in agreement with God's kingdom, and that's why they had to have women elders. It was a requirement. If the movement didn't do it, it was sin. If we don't do it, it is sin. It wasn't sin years ago because it wasn't a moral test based on time. Now it's a moral test constrained by time. Just like slavery was a moral test based on time back then.
Why it causes separation. The word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword, and it splits asunder.
Yeah. Thank you for your comments, Josephine.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that lecture. Now I don't know if I'm ready to stand up next week and talk after that one.
Yeah. We've just got to do what we can do. There's many things you could. This is a big story, and we didn't go into hardly any of it. So, but I think that's what it means. If you were just to summarize it and make it simply, are we prepared to change our mind and drop things to get to here? It's hard, but anyway. If no one's got anything else they'd like to say, speak now. Otherwise, happy Sabbath, everyone. Hope everyone has a wonderful Sabbath, and I look forward to seeing more of you in person soon, hopefully. But happy Sabbath and God bless.